Emma hesitated. Going back to Earth, especially to that place, was beyond risky. The Forbidden Zone had been abandoned by humanity long ago, deemed too dangerous for anyone to enter. But if there was any chance this signal was important, they couldn't ignore it. They had to investigate. It wasn't just about scientific curiosity anymore. There was something bigger at play, something that could change everything they knew about Earth, and maybe even humanity itself. "We have no choice," Emma said firmly, her decision final. "We need to go down there. If we don't, we may never understand what's really going on, and whatever is down there might be a danger to the whole galaxy." Sarah and Ian exchanged a glance, but they knew there was no arguing with her. When Emma made a decision, she was relentless. They all knew the risks. Earth wasn't the same planet they had left behind all those years ago. Over time, Earth had transformed, evolving into something unrecognizable, shaped by the aftermath of the ancient wars and genetic manipulations that had once plagued its history. What they were about to venture into was no longer the Earth of their memories. It was something darker. Within hours, the plan was set. They would use the Orion Station's transport ship, a small but highly advanced craft, to make the descent. The journey would take several hours, but it was the only way to get to the coordinates without alerting any lingering military presence. Once on the ground, they'd have to act fast. As the ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, Emma stared out at the planet below. The world was beautiful, still lush with forests, oceans, and sprawling cities. Yet, as they neared their destination, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something had been buried, hidden away for far too long, and now it was coming back. When they finally landed, the surroundings were eerily quiet. There was no sign of life, no sounds of distant animals or humans, just silence and a vast, empty landscape. The Forbidden Zone looked as it always had in the old maps, a barren stretch of land, covered in fog and ruins, far from civilization. It was a place of mystery and fear. The air smelled of something old, of forgotten memories, and unspoken truths. As the door to the transport ship opened, the team stepped out, their boots crunching on the cracked earth. Emma led the way, her heart pounding with anticipation. The signal was getting stronger, now more like a beacon calling them to the heart of this desolate place. "What are we walking into?" Sarah asked, her voice tense, as she scanned the surroundings. "Whatever it is," Emma replied, her gaze locked onto the horizon. "It's something we weren't meant to find." The further they walked, the more they felt it. The sensation of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. Emma wasn't sure if it was the signal playing tricks on her mind, but the air felt heavier, charged with something dangerous. She wasn't alone in her growing anxiety. The others could sense it too. Just as they reached the edge of what looked like a large, crumbled structure, the signal went silent. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, without warning, the entire landscape around them seemed to tremble. Something was coming. The question lingered in Emma's mind. What was hidden here? And more importantly, why did Earth's dark past feel like it was about to come back to life? The ground shook again, this time more violently, as the faintest sound of movement echoed through the air. Something was waiting for them in the shadows, something far worse than they ever expected. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, the kind that pressed down on the mind, making every breath feel heavier than the last. As Emma and her team moved further into the ruins, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The structures around them, broken walls, shattered columns, and crumbling buildings, told a story of a once thriving place that had long been forgotten. The world around them seemed frozen in time, untouched by the advances of modern civilization, as though the Earth itself had decided to bury whatever had happened here. Emma led the way, her boots crunching over the debris of what might have once been a vast research facility. Her mind raced as she thought back to the signal they had intercepted. It was so unlike anything they'd encountered before. Something about the way it pulsed, the strange rhythmic patterns. It felt like a message, but one that had been hidden for years. And now, here they were, standing at the very heart of it, unable to turn back. "Emma," Ian called out, breaking the silence. "I don't like this. This place. It feels wrong." Emma didn't respond immediately. She could feel it too, the strange, unnerving energy that seemed to hum beneath her skin. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. They had come this far. The signal was only a few miles deeper into the zone. And the closer they got, the clearer the source became. It was as though the ground itself was guiding them toward it, and Emma wasn't about to ignore that pull. They continued their descent into the ruins, making their way through the cracked stone and rusted metal that seemed to have once been part of some grand scientific facility. Emma couldn't help but wonder what kind of experiments had taken place here. What had gone so horribly wrong that the entire area was sealed off and forgotten? As they entered the next section of the complex, Emma spotted a set of large double doors ahead. The doors were heavy, made of steel, and the once shiny surface was now scratched and weathered by time. There was no sign of life, no footprints, no evidence of any human presence in years. The doors stood there, almost daring them to open them, to reveal what lay beyond. "Should we try to get inside?" Sarah asked, her voice low, cautious. She sounded like she was waiting for Emma to make the decision. Emma turned to her team, taking a deep breath. "We're here to find answers. If there's something behind those doors, we need to know what it is." Ian gave a reluctant nod. "You're right, but just be careful. We have no idea what we're walking into." Emma approached the doors slowly, her hand resting on the cold metal. There was a faint, eerie vibration coming from the other side. It was subtle, but it was there, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. She tried the handle, but it was locked. With a quick glance back at her team, she pulled out a small tool from her pack and began to work on the lock. It was old, much older than anything they had on the Orion station, but after a few moments, the lock clicked open, and the doors groaned as they swung inward. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything they had imagined. The room beyond was vast, stretching far deeper than they had expected. The floor was smooth and metallic, reflecting the faint lights overhead, and rows upon rows of strange equipment lined the walls. But it wasn't the equipment that caught their attention. It was what was in the center of the room. A massive cylindrical chamber stood before them, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. At the top of the cylinder was a glass-like dome, within which floated what appeared to be a large, pulsating orb. The orb was glowing with an otherworldly light, shifting colors in a way that seemed almost unnatural. The air around it felt charged, as if something immense was contained within. Emma took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the pull of the orb, the strange energy it exuded. This was no ordinary scientific device. It was something far more advanced, something beyond their understanding. And it was this orb, this thing, that had sent the signal. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the orb. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely, but she felt an overwhelming sense of danger. Whatever this orb was, it was connected to the signal they had received. And if they didn't figure out what it was soon, there was no telling what could happen next. "There's something inside the orb," Emma said quietly, squinting to make out the shape inside. It almost looked like a figure, a human figure. "No, it couldn't be. It's alive." Ian's voice rose with alarm. "Alive? Are you sure? It looks like some sort of containment chamber." But Emma's instincts told her otherwise. The figure inside the orb wasn't just floating there. It was shifting, its limbs twitching ever so slightly. She could see the outline of what appeared to be a human, but there was something off about it. Its features were blurred, distorted, as if the orb itself was manipulating what it held inside. They stood there, frozen in awe, unable to look away. The entire room seemed to hum with an intense energy, vibrating with a force they could barely comprehend. The orb was alive in some way, and whatever was inside it was far from human. Emma could feel it in her bones. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. This was something much darker. Suddenly, the orb began to glow brighter. The symbols around it started to flash in a rhythmic pattern, as if they were responding to something. Then, a low rumbling sound reverberated through the chamber. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the air thickened, becoming almost impossible to breathe. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said urgently, her eyes wide with panic. "This is too dangerous." But Emma couldn't move. She felt rooted to the spot, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. There was something inside that orb, something that should never have been disturbed. Whatever it was, it had been locked away for a reason. And now, they had unlocked it. The room shook again, more violently this time, and the orb flashed with an intense light, blinding them all for a split second. When the light faded, the figure inside the orb was no longer there. "Where did it go?" Ian asked, his voice full of dread. Emma's heart raced. She had no answer. The orb was now completely empty, its glow dimming as though whatever had been inside it had vanished. But the sensation of being watched, of something lurking in the shadows, was stronger than ever. Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. They had disturbed something that didn't want to be found. And now, they had no idea what it would do next. The rumbling beneath their feet grew louder, and the entire complex seemed to shake as if the earth itself was reacting to what had just been unleashed. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, but one thing was certain. They were no longer alone. "Get back to the ship," Emma ordered, her voice sharp. "Now." But as they turned to leave, they heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder. A low guttural growl, echoing from deep within the complex. Something was coming. Something that had been awakened by their presence. And now, there was no escape. The ground beneath them trembled again, this time more violently than before. Emma's heart raced as the deep, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber, its source impossible to pinpoint. The low, guttural sound reverberated off the walls, vibrating in her chest like a living thing. It was as if the very earth was alive, reacting to the disturbance they had caused. A feeling of dread settled over her. Whatever was coming, it wasn't something they could handle. The figure they had uncovered, whatever it was, had awakened something far more dangerous. "Move," Emma shouted, urgency flooding her voice. She turned toward the exit, but her legs felt heavy, as though the air itself was working against her. The rumbling grew louder. And then, crack, a section of the ceiling above them caved in, sending debris crashing to the ground. They had no time to think, only to run. Sarah was the first to react, her legs moving quickly as she sprinted toward the hallway. Ian followed closely behind, but Emma hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the room one last time. The orb, the figure, the eerie glow, it was all still fresh in her mind. There was something deeply unsettling about what they had found. What was inside that orb? What had they released? "Emma," Sarah's voice cut through her thoughts. "We have to go. Now." Emma snapped back to reality and sprinted after them. The hallway ahead was dark, and the air was thick with dust and the lingering hum of strange machinery. The walls seemed to close in around them, narrowing as they pushed forward. The growling sound had intensified, now almost deafening, and Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Whatever was following them, it wasn't far behind. As they turned a corner, Emma stumbled slightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic was setting in, but she knew she had to stay focused. There was a way out. There had to be. "Emma," Ian shouted, his voice laced with fear. "The exit's blocked. We're trapped." She followed his gaze, her stomach sinking as she saw the collapse ahead. A massive section of the corridor had caved in, blocking their way. There was no going forward. "Don't stop," Emma ordered, her voice trembling with tension. "Find another way." Sarah's eyes darted around the corridor, searching for an alternative escape route. Then she spotted a door to their left, small and inconspicuous, its surface dented and scratched, but still intact. It led to an adjacent room, one that hadn't been on their original map of the complex. Without a word, Sarah bolted toward it, the others quickly following her. The door creaked open with a loud groan, and they hurried inside. The room was small, but it offered a brief moment of respite. It was filled with old crates and equipment, some broken, some covered in a thick layer of dust. There was no time to examine it, but Emma's instincts told her they needed to hide. Whatever was out there wouldn't stop until it found them. The growling was now a constant presence, reverberating through the walls, growing louder with each passing second. "I think we've bought ourselves a moment," Sarah said, her voice shaky but relieved. "For now." Emma tried to steady her breathing, but it was hard to ignore the adrenaline that was flooding her system. She had never felt fear like this before. Something was coming, something powerful, and they had no way of stopping it. "I don't think we're safe here for long," Emma said, glancing around the small room. "We need to figure out what's happening, what we've unleashed." But before anyone could respond, the ground shook again, harder this time. The whole room seemed to tremble, and Emma felt the walls close in on them. A loud bang echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. Then the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. They were not alone, and whatever was coming was far from human. Is it human?" Ian whispered, his voice barely audible. Emma shook her head, her mind racing. "No. Whatever it is, it's not human. And it's not alone either. There's something much bigger at play here." They could all hear the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the complex, something fast. The growl was becoming a full-on roar now, echoing through the corridors like a storm. There was no denying it. The creature, or creatures, were closing in on them. "We can't stay here," Sarah said urgently. "We need to move. Now." Emma looked toward the door they had entered through. The walls were vibrating again, as though the building itself was groaning under the pressure of the approaching threat. But just as she turned to make a decision, something caught her eye. A faint glow from the far side of the room. It was a small panel, almost hidden beneath the dust and debris. It flickered to life, casting a pale blue light against the walls. "Wait," Emma whispered. "There's something here." She moved toward the panel, her pulse quickening. It looked like an old access console, a relic of the complex's past. Could it still work? Could it help them escape? She wiped away the dust with her sleeve and pressed a few of the buttons, praying that it wasn't too old to function. The screen flickered for a moment, then flashed a sequence of numbers and symbols that made no sense to her. Then, a message appeared, a single sentence written in red. "System override detected. Emergency lockdown initiated." Emma's heart sank. Lockdown. They were trapped, not just by the creatures, but by the very facility itself. "No," she muttered, her mind racing. "This can't be happening." Just as she was about to press another button, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The creature, or whatever it was right outside the room. They could hear it moving, shifting in the darkened hallway, sniffing the air, searching for them. "Emma." Ian's voice was barely a whisper. "It's here." The sound of a loud crash came from the hallway, followed by a shrill, high-pitched screech. Something massive was tearing through the building, causing the walls to crack and bend. The floor beneath them trembled once more, sending the entire team stumbling to the ground. "Stay quiet," Emma hissed, motioning for the others to be still. They all crouched low behind a large crate, holding their breath as the creature passed by the entrance of the room. Its footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and they could feel the force of its presence like a wave of terror. The growling was constant now, as if the creature was speaking through sound, sending waves of unease through the very air. Seconds felt like hours as they huddled there in the dark, praying that the creature wouldn't hear them. Emma's mind raced. There was no way they were getting out through the front door now. not with the creature so close. They had to find another way, an escape route they hadn't noticed before. They had to leave before whatever was hunting them found them first. But where could they go? The walls were closing in, the ground was shaking, and there was no clear way out. The emergency lockdown had trapped them, and with the creature on the loose, their time was running out. Emma felt the cold sweat on her skin as the growl grew louder again, closer than ever. They had awoken something ancient, something that might never let them leave this place alive. The clock was ticking, and they were running out of time. The heavy footsteps grew louder, each step reverberating through the walls, shaking the very ground beneath them. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, and the air around them felt thick, oppressive, as if it too was holding its breath. She could barely hear the others' quiet breathing over the sound of the creature's movement, each tremor in the ground telling them that it was getting closer, until it was practically on top of them. The tension was unbearable. "What are we going to do?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with fear, but also a hint of desperation. "It's right outside." Emma didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing, her thoughts moving too fast to keep up with. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't keep hiding in this room forever. The walls were shaking with every step of the beast, and the emergency lockdown was keeping them trapped in this forsaken place. The creatures outside were relentless. Emma didn't know how much longer they could remain undetected. In a flash of clarity, Emma's eyes darted back to the panel she had been tinkering with. The screen had flickered again, and the last line of the message haunted her thoughts. "System override detected. Emergency lockdown initiated." Her mind grasped the words. Emergency lockdown. There had to be a way to override it. She had to find a way out. If she could access the central systems, maybe she could disable the lockdown, reopen the doors, and give them a chance to escape. But time was running out. There was no more room for hesitation. She pulled herself up from behind the crate, ignoring the sharp sting of fear that gripped her chest. "Ian, Sarah, stay down and keep quiet. I'm going to try to hack the system." Both of them nodded, understanding the urgency but clearly terrified. "Be quick," Ian whispered, his voice tight with panic. Emma rushed back to the console. Her fingers moved quickly over the buttons, pressing and swiping, trying to make sense of the old, outdated system. The screen blinked again, and she saw more symbols flash across the display. This time, numbers she didn't recognize and a series of encrypted locks. No time to waste, she thought, and began typing commands furiously, her mind working in overdrive. She'd done this before. She had to do this now. The creature's growl echoed again, closer than before. There was no other option. A door slammed in the hallway just outside their room. The beast was moving, its presence undeniable. It was close. Suddenly, the system gave a soft beep, and the screen displayed a new message. Override accepted. Lockdown G-Chew. G-Chew equals G-Chew / G-Chew G-Chew. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The command had gone through, but she couldn't afford to relax. She pressed a few more buttons, furiously searching for the control that would release the emergency lock on the facility's doors. A sharp crash sounded outside the door. The creature had finally reached their hiding place. The growl grew louder, deeper. They could hear it scratching at the walls, a noise that made Emma's stomach turn. The air was thick with tension, too thick. Another beep. The system flashed green. Override complete. Emergency doors unlocked. The moment the system confirmed the lockdown was over, Emma didn't waste a second. She jumped up, grabbing the others by the arm. "We have to go. Now." The three of them rushed to the door. The hallway was still and silent now, too silent. Emma didn't trust it. She knew the creature was nearby, but they had no other choice. They sprinted into the corridor, each of them scanning the area for any signs of movement. The walls trembled once more. The creature was still in the complex, hunting them. They moved quickly, pushing forward, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The emergency exit wasn't far, It was just around the next corner, and they had to make it there before whatever was lurking in the shadows found them. The creature could be anywhere. The entire complex felt like a maze, its narrow, twisting hallways and corridors disorienting and dark. Suddenly, Sarah stumbled. She grabbed onto Emma's arm, her face pale. "Wait, we can't go back the way we came. It's already there. It'll catch us." Emma's mind raced. The creature's already ahead of us. What now? They turned down another corridor, hoping it would lead them to safety, but the growl grew louder, its sound bouncing off the walls in all directions. The creature was closing in. Emma could feel the dread tightening in her chest. "Go," she screamed, pushing them all forward. "The exit is this way." They moved as fast as they could, but their every step felt sluggish, weighed down by fear. Every time Emma glanced over her shoulder, the creature's presence felt closer, as though it were right behind them. Then, just as they rounded another corner, Emma saw it. The emergency exit door was right in front of them, just a few meters away. The metal doors loomed ahead, gleaming in the dim light. They were almost there, but as they neared the exit, the ground suddenly shook with a violent force, knocking them off balance. Emma stumbled, her vision blurring. She could hear the creature's growl vibrating through the walls, its anger palpable. "We're not going to make it," Sarah gasped, her voice full of dread. Emma's mind went blank. This was it. There was no time left. But then, out of nowhere, Ian grabbed Emma's arm. "We're not giving up. Not yet." Before Emma could respond, Ian was already at the door, smashing his fist into the control panel beside it. Sparks flew, and the door let out a loud mechanical clang. It slid open just enough for them to slip through. "Go," Ian shouted, pushing them through the door. "Run." Without another word, they ran, bursting out into the open air. The night sky stretched out above them, quiet and still, as though they had just escaped from a nightmare. Their breaths came in ragged gasps as they ran through the open terrain, leaving the complex and the creature behind. But even as they ran, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't over. They had escaped, yes, but they didn't know what they had unleashed. And the terrifying truth lingered in the back of her mind. They were no longer alone. Something was coming, something far worse than they could ever have imagined. As they ran further from the complex, the ground behind them trembled once more. Emma looked back, and for a moment, she thought she saw something massive and dark moving through the shadows of the ruins. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. But the fear remained, because they knew that whatever had been unleashed, whatever had woken up, was not done. It was just beginning. The worst was yet to come. The night air was cold as Emma, Ian, and Sarah staggered across the uneven terrain, the exhaustion from the harrowing escape weighing heavily on their bodies. Their breaths came in heavy, uneven gasps, each one a reminder of how close they had come to certain death. The complex, now a smoldering silhouette behind them, still echoed with the remnants of the chaos they had left behind. But they couldn't linger. Not now. Not when they had no idea what was following them, or how long they had before it found them again. They didn't stop running. They couldn't. "We're not safe yet," Emma said breathlessly, her voice sharp with urgency. She didn't need to look behind her to know that the creature, the thing they had unwittingly unleashed, was still out there, searching for them. That growl, that deep, guttural sound, had been burned into her mind, a constant reminder of the terror that had come to life within the complex. Whatever it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "Where do we go?" Sarah panted, her face pale with fear. "What now?" Emma's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization or safety. The barren landscape stretched out before them, empty and desolate. There was nothing for miles, nothing except for the looming darkness of the ruins behind them. Emma's stomach churned at the thought of going back, but they had no choice. The creature hadn't just been set free. It had been awakened, and it wouldn't stop until it found them. They were being hunted. "I don't know," Emma said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "We need to put as much distance between us and that place as possible. There has to be something, somewhere we can go for help." They kept running, pushing themselves harder with each passing minute, but the landscape seemed endless. The harsh wind bit at their skin, the cold seeping into their bones. Every step felt like 1,000, the exhaustion gnawing at them, but they couldn't stop. They couldn't slow down. Behind them, the growling had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The absence of sound was worse than the creature's pursuit. Emma could feel the air grow still, and every step she took felt heavier, like the weight of the earth itself was pressing down on her. The unease in her gut gnawed at her, the feeling that something was wrong, that they weren't alone, growing stronger with each passing second. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she turned her head, scanning the dark expanse. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "It's too quiet." But before she could say anything else, the ground beneath them shifted. A low, menacing growl rose from the distance, one that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. It wasn't just one growl. It was a chorus. More growls, more sounds, rising up from the depths of the earth itself, surrounding them, closing in. "It's not just one," Ian shouted, his voice panicked. There are more. They're everywhere." Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she turned, her eyes searching frantically in the dark for any sign of the creatures. It was impossible to see anything. Everything was shrouded in darkness, the landscape a blur in the dim light. But the growls, they were unmistakable. She spun around. Her instincts screamed at her to run. But where? The creatures were all around them now, their growls rising in pitch, louder and more frequent. They were being surrounded. "They found us," Sarah cried out. Her face was pale, terror-stricken, as she grabbed Emma's arm, her grip tight. Emma tried to think. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos, of the danger closing in on them. They were too exposed. They couldn't outrun them, not in the open like this. The creatures were faster, stronger, and there were too many of them. "There," Ian shouted, pointing toward a distant hill, a ridge that might offer some cover. "We can make it to the ridge. It's our only chance." Emma didn't hesitate. "Run. Now." The three of them broke into a sprint, their legs burning with the effort as they pushed themselves toward the ridge. But as they ran, the ground beneath them rumbled again, a violent tremor that nearly sent them crashing to the ground. The creatures were getting closer. They could hear the pounding of heavy feet, feel the vibrations through the earth as the creatures moved with terrifying speed. Emma glanced back once, just once, to see a hulking shadow moving toward them. It was massive, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind it, she could see more. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, other creatures emerging from the ruins. They were all chasing them, and they were fast. Too fast. Her pulse raced. "We won't make it." Just as the ridge seemed within reach, a massive roar echoed behind them, and the ground shook violently. The lead creature had broken free from the pack, and it was gaining on them, faster than they could run. Emma's heart leaped into her throat as she realized they weren't going to outrun it. They had no time, no hope. Suddenly, Ian stumbled, his foot catching on the uneven ground. He fell to his knees, a cry escaping his lips as he tried to push himself up. Emma reached back, but it was too late. The lead creature had already closed the distance, its massive claws gleaming in the moonlight. It lunged forward with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping open. "Ian!" Sarah screamed. In one swift motion, the creature was upon him, its claws sinking into Ian's body. Emma's heart stopped, her vision blurring as she heard the sickening sound of tearing flesh. But even in the chaos, there was no time to think, no time to mourn. They couldn't stop. They couldn't save him. They had to survive. Run. Emma screamed at Sarah, her voice hoarse, desperate. We can't help him. Run. Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she didn't hesitate. She turned and sprinted toward the ridge, her face twisted in anguish, her body shaking with fear and sorrow. Emma followed her, the fear of being caught almost unbearable, but there was no choice now. The moment had passed. Ian was lost, and now it was just the two of them. They reached the ridge, climbing up the jagged rocks as quickly as they could. At the top, they paused for just a moment to catch their breath, their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. They looked back toward the complex, where the shadows of the creatures moved in the distance, their glowing eyes piercing the dark. But just as Emma thought they might have a moment to rest, the ground shook again, stronger, harder. Something was rising from beneath the earth, something far bigger than the creatures that had been chasing them. A deafening roar echoed from the depths, and the sky seemed to tremble with it. "What is that?" Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Emma's eyes widened in horror as the earth cracked open below them. And from the chasm, a massive figure emerged, dark, towering, and covered in shifting shadows. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, something beyond comprehension, beyond anything they had ever encountered. They were not just being hunted by creatures. They were facing something far more terrifying, and they had no idea how to stop it. The true nightmare had just begun. The world around Emma and Sarah seemed to freeze, as if the very air held its breath. The ground beneath them shook violently as the massive figure, something larger, darker, and far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined, emerged from the chasm below. It loomed over them, towering like an ancient god, its form shrouded in dark shadows that seemed to shift and writhe like living tendrils. It was impossible to comprehend its full size, but the sheer weight of its presence made everything else seem insignificant. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, vibrating through the earth and the air, sending tremors through the very ground. The roar that followed was deafening, an earth-shattering sound that filled the sky and seemed to echo in the distant mountains. Emma felt her body freeze, as though the very sound had paralyzed her, holding her in place like prey before a predator. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto them, burning with an unnatural hunger. For a moment, neither Emma nor Sarah could move, their bodies locked in shock and fear. They had never imagined anything like this, nothing that could compare to what they were facing now. What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with fear. Emma could hardly find her voice. Her mind was racing, but it wasn't fast enough to catch up to the horror unfolding before them. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some ancient creature. It was something far worse, something born from the very depths of the earth itself. A force of nature, or perhaps something beyond nature, something from a time long forgotten. The air around them felt heavier, as though the creature was not just present in their world, but was drawing them into its darkness. The shadows around it seemed to stretch, as if they were reaching out, pulling at the very fabric of reality. "We have to move," Emma finally whispered, her voice low and shaking. Her body was stiff, every instinct telling her to run, but her feet refused to obey. She had never felt so small, so utterly powerless. Whatever it was, they had just unleashed something that could not be stopped, and they were now its prey. Sarah's eyes darted to the ridge where they had been standing moments before. Where do we go? It's everywhere. It was true. The ridge, once their only hope of escape, was now a mere shadow against the vastness of the creature and its growing army of minions. The other creatures, those that had been chasing them earlier, were now emerging from the shadows, moving toward the towering entity as if it were their leader, their master. They surrounded it, their eyes glowing in unison, an army ready to descend upon them. Emma's breath hitched in her throat as she realized something even worse. The earth was still shaking, the ground splitting in other places around them. More of the creatures were emerging from below, their massive forms crawling out of fissures in the earth, their growls and roars blending into a deafening cacophony. They were not just facing one monster. They were facing an army, and it was endless. "We have to find a way out," Emma said, her voice urgent, though her body still felt like it was made of stone. There was no clear escape. The creatures were everywhere, and the ground was still shaking with each new arrival. The entire landscape seemed to be alive, as if the earth itself had turned against them. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. "We can't outrun them. There's nowhere to go." Emma clenched her fists, forcing herself to think. The fear was consuming her, but she couldn't give in to it. Not yet. They had to survive. They had to survive. "There's no running," she said, her voice a whisper now, a quiet resolve starting to form in her mind. "But maybe we can fight back." Sarah turned to her, wide-eyed. "Fight back? How? Look at them. Look at that thing." Emma nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the towering creature in the distance. "I know it's impossible, but we can't just give up. We need a plan. If we can find the heart of the complex, the central core, we might be able to use the facility's systems to our advantage." Sarah frowned, confused. "You mean we're going back to the complex?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "We have to. There's a control room, a terminal that could give us access to the systems, maybe even a way to shut them down. It's our only shot." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Emma held up a hand, silencing her. "We don't have a choice. If we stay out here, they'll kill us. If we go back, maybe we can stop them, but we need to move fast. We don't have much time." The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. Emma turned toward the distant remains of the complex, the looming ruins standing like a dark, broken monument in the distance. The towering figure, the one at the center of the destruction, was still there, but the creature's attention seemed to be divided. The army of creatures was slowly advancing, but the massive one still stood, its gaze fixed on the horizon, on them. "Stay close," Emma said, taking a deep breath. "We move now. No matter what happens, we can't stop." Together, they turned and ran toward the complex. The earth beneath their feet continued to rumble, the sound of growling and tearing metal echoing through the air. The creatures' heavy footsteps were growing louder, their presence undeniable. But the complex, the heart of the chaos, was their only hope. If they could make it there, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. The world was closing in on them, but Emma's resolve was unshakable. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. They reached the complex just as the first of the creatures began to close the distance. Emma's mind was focused, her every step driven by the need to survive. They passed through the broken gates, darting past the wreckage of the complex's outer walls. Inside, the familiar sound of machinery hummed in the background, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Emma didn't hesitate. She knew exactly where they had to go. She led Sarah through the hallways, pushing past the debris and wreckage that littered the place. The facility had once been a marvel of technology, but now it was little more than a haunting shell of its former self. They reached the central control room, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the flickering light of a terminal offered the faintest hope. Emma rushed to the terminal, fingers flying across the keys. She had no idea if this would work, but she couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. She needed to access the main system, override the security protocols, and somehow stop the creatures before they tore the world apart. As the screen flickered to life, Emma's heart sank. Security breach detected. System lockdown initiated. Containment protocols active. She looked at Sarah, panic creeping into her chest. "We're running out of time," she whispered. "We need to find a way to stop it. Now." But the growl of the creatures was growing louder again. The battle for survival was far from over. The real fight had just begun. The sound of the creatures' growls echoed louder as Emma's fingers flew over the terminal, trying desperately to override the security protocols. Every second felt like a lifetime, the pressure mounting with every passing moment. The screen flickered, showing error messages and warnings, but nothing that would help her stop the growing nightmare outside. She could feel the heat of fear rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. "We can't let them get through here," Emma muttered under her breath. She had to find a way to access the facility's core systems. There had to be something. The facility had been built to withstand almost anything, a stronghold in case of disaster. But now, in the face of an invasion from creatures they couldn't even begin to understand, it all felt pointless. Sarah's voice broke her concentration, trembling with fear. "Emma, they're getting closer. We don't have much time." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. The growling from outside had intensified, and she could hear the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against metal. The creatures weren't just moving toward the complex anymore. They were inside, tearing through the walls with terrifying precision. Every instinct screamed at Emma to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Stay close," Emma said, her voice filled with resolve. "We're not giving up. Not yet." She turned back to the terminal, her mind racing. The system was older than it looked, its codes outdated, but it was still the only chance they had. The only hope. She needed to get into the facility's central control, access the systems that governed the entire complex. If she could find a way to disable the security lockdown, there might be a way to shut down the creatures, or at least slow them down long enough for them to escape. She pressed a few more keys, trying different commands, but everything she tried seemed to be blocked by the system's security. Desperation clawed at her. The room was growing colder, the air thick with the scent of fear. She could hear the creatures, dozens of them, moving through the halls, getting closer with every second. Suddenly, a new message appeared on the terminal screen. "Primary system override detected. Security lockdown in progress." Emma's heart raced. That was it. They were running out of time. "That's it," she cried, her voice filled with a surge of hope. "We can access the override system. It'll give us control of everything. The doors, the power, maybe even the defense systems." "But how?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Emma didn't have time to explain. She quickly began typing, inputting a series of commands that she hoped would work. The terminal beeped and buzzed, the lights above flickering, as if the facility itself was responding to the commands. The growling from outside had become a deafening roar, and Emma knew they had mere moments before the creatures breached the room. Come on," Emma muttered under her breath as her fingers flew across the keys, her mind trying to stay one step ahead of the chaos. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, the fear and determination mixing into a potent drive. This was their last shot. With one final command, the terminal beeped and then went silent. For a split second, Emma thought she had failed, that the creatures would break through the door, and that there would be nothing left to do but run for their lives. But then, the screen flickered back to life, showing a new message. "Override complete. Security lockdown deactivated. Core systems available." Emma felt a surge of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. She quickly ran her hands over the terminal, accessing the control systems for the complex. The map of the facility appeared on the screen, showing the location of every door, every security system, and every internal monitoring system. Okay, Emma breathed, scanning the screen. "I can use the central defense systems. I can activate the automated turrets and force fields. That should slow them down, maybe even push them back. What if that doesn't work?" Sarah asked, her voice full of dread. "What if it's not enough?" Emma clenched her fists, her mind set. "It's all we've got. We have to make it work. If we don't, we're as good as dead." The growling outside intensified again, and the sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the complex. The creatures were close. Too close. She turned back to the terminal, activating the central defense systems. The map on the screen shifted, showing the locations of the turrets. She had just enough time to turn them on before the creatures breached the door. The first blast of gunfire echoed through the facility, the sound of high-powered turrets firing at the advancing creatures. The door to the control room rattled violently as the creatures slammed against it, their growls deafening. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her focus, working quickly to activate the rest of the systems. The automated force fields came online, surrounding the room, offering them a temporary shield from the oncoming onslaught. For a moment, everything went silent. The growling ceased, but Emma knew better than to think they were safe. The creatures had only been slowed down, not defeated. She could hear them outside, the sound of their heavy feet pounding against the floor, the scratching of claws against metal. They were still coming, still closing in. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice strained. "They won't stop. They'll find a way through." Emma nodded, her mind already working through the next step. They had bought themselves a little time, but it wouldn't last long. The creatures would adapt, and they would be ready. But Emma couldn't give up. She had one more plan, one final hope. "I've got an idea," Emma said, turning to Sarah. "We need to head for the underground transport tunnels. If we can get there, we can take the emergency exit out of the complex. It's a long shot, but it's the best chance we have." The two of them turned toward the door, the sound of the creatures growing louder once more. They had no time to waste. Emma pressed the button on the terminal to open the door. As the heavy metal door slid open with a screech, the creatures surged forward, their glowing eyes fixated on them. The turrets continued to fire, but it was clear the creatures were learning, adapting to the attack. The two of them bolted through the door, running down the hallway, as the sound of the creatures' pursuit filled the air. Their only hope was to make it to the tunnels. But even as they sprinted, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were running toward something far worse than they could ever imagine. The nightmare was just beginning. The question that haunted her now wasn't if they would escape, but whether they could ever truly escape at all.